We've all waited long enough for this, so let me cut to the chase. The PlayStation 5 Pro is real, we have it, we've tested it, and we're going to tell you if it's worth it. And if that sounds like a really straightforward introduction, that's because I'm going to give it to you in a really straightforward manner. Forget the back-of-the-box terminology and all those impressive numbers. I'm going to answer the most important question about this console. Will you actually notice a difference? I'm Giovanni Colantonio, I'm the senior gaming editor at Digital Trends, and I'm here to tell you all about the PS5 Pro. Now, just like Sony did with the PlayStation 4 last generation, this console is a souped-up version of the regular PS5 that's aimed at serious tech enthusiasts. Yeah, it's a big price tag, but you're getting three things for that cost. The first is an upgraded GPU that has 67% more compute units than the PS5 and 28% faster memory. Then you've got advanced ray tracing, which makes for improved lighting. The big feature, though, is PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution, or PSR for short. Actually, no, let's go with PSSR for that one. Now, let me put all of this into layman's terms. In theory, you're getting better lighting, more consistent performance, and the ability to play supported games at 4K and 60 frames per second. But does it actually deliver that? Now, before I get into any of that, let's just talk some brass tacks really quick. Design-wise, this is kind of a middle child between the original PS5 and its slim refresh. It's the same height as the 2020 launch version, but it's not as deep. The only visual difference is that it features these black gills on either side, which give it a distinct design, but also mean that you'll have to buy entirely new faceplates for it. It also doesn't come with a disk drive or a vertical stand. Those are both sold separately too. More on that later. Now, what's inside of it, you may be asking? Surprise! It's a PS5. Don't expect any UI tweaks or anything like that here. It's the exact same system when it comes to the core features, save for some Wi-Fi 7 support, which is a handy addition if you can take advantage of it. There is one very impactful change here though, and honestly it's a better selling point than most of its features. This has a 2TB solid-state drive. That doubles the PS5 Slim storage, which already improved on the 2020 model. And let me tell you, as someone who has to delete a PS5 game every time I download a new one, this is a pretty major upgrade that justifies a bit of the cost. Seriously, a comparable external drive will run you around $80, so it's not nothing. Okay, let's talk performance. The promise of the PS5 Pro is simple. 4K games at 60 frames per second. Does the PS5 Pro deliver that? Yes. But with some caveats. If you buy this, don't expect every game you open to suddenly operate at peak performance. That's not how it works. Games need to be specifically optimized for the Pro to get the most out of it, usually with new graphics modes. That said, I've already seen certain games that don't have dedicated Pro options seeing some benefits. Dragon Age the Veilguard is just a bit crisper on the Pro, something I couldn't exactly tell in the moment, but was fairly clear when I put footage of it side by side. Now, anecdotally, Black Myth Wukong seems to be a bit more stable when it comes to performance, but it's still plagued with screen tearing, pop-in, visual bugs when turning the camera in performance mode, and more. Now, this also comes with a PS5 Pro Boost feature that's meant to stabilize supported PS4 games too, but the details on how exactly that works are sparse, and we're still testing it. I did notice that the PS4 remake of Shadow of the Colossus does have a clearer image, especially when I'm looking at objects way off in the distance. But there's no real way to tell what's supported and what isn't. Something like Bloodborne is locked at 30 frames per second, so it remains locked at 30 frames per second here. All of that is to say that you're gonna see changes for non-enhanced games on a case-by-case basis. It's likely gonna tighten the sharpness and performance, but not inherently perfect it without a specific mode. Now, for the games that are specifically optimized, yes, the PS5 Pro really does deliver, and that's thanks to PSSR. Now, this uses AI upscaling to basically make an image look like it's in 4K while maintaining 60 frames per second in performance mode. You will notice a difference immediately in games that have a Performance Pro option. Games like Spider-Man 2 and Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart look phenomenal, and they run at a very stable frame rate from what I've seen so far. In fact, PSSR looks so good in games that I had a lot of moments where I genuinely felt like the upscaling looked better than the ray tracing enhanced Fidelity Pro modes in the same games. Now, is that an optical illusion? Not exactly. Here's Digital Trends computing lead reporter Jacob Roach to explain why exactly that can happen.
Yeah, the AI upscaled image can definitely look better, and that largely comes down to the fact of AI is really good at doing anti-aliasing. So in the resolution mode, you might have a poor implementation of anti-aliasing, whereas the AI upscaling, even though it's using a lower resolution, has better anti-aliasing, so it looks sharper.
So yeah, if you look at screenshots or still images comparing PSSR and Fidelity Pro, you may actually find yourself preferring the upscaled version. But a game isn't a still image, and that's where the pros and cons of PSSR become more visible. Image stability is the name of the game here. In my testing, Fidelity Pro and Performance Pro could look almost identical in snapshots, but the differences were clearer in motion. The best example that I saw of that was in Dragon's Dogma 2. This game has been enhanced for the PS5 Pro, and it runs at a much smoother frame rate for it, even if it's not quite at 60. When I swap PSSR to favor performance, I see way less light jittering in the frame rate than I do in graphics mode. I could actually make out more hair detail on the backs of monsters. It's definitely an improvement. There is some trade-off with that, though. When standing in a field of golden grass waving in the wind, I can see some serious artifacting around the foliage as it moves. That issue isn't nearly as pronounced without PSSR. With PSSR, you can expect to catch a lot of eccentricities like that if you look. If you're moving really quickly in a game or spinning the camera around and come to a fast stop, you can sometimes catch that split second where the image has to settle so the upscaled resolution can kind of snap into place. For the most part, these are really minor issues that are consistent with similar PC upscaling tech. But that's the trade-off you get here if you want that 4K 60 frame per second experience. It's going to be just a bit less stable, but honestly not by that much from what I've seen so far. Let me stop for a second and note that I think the place you're going to see the biggest changes are actually in third-party games. Sony's first-party games are built with PS5 in mind and optimized accordingly. Something like Demon's Souls barely benefits from the tech boost. But it's games like Dragon's Dogma 2 and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth that are really going to reap the benefits in Performance Pro, simply because they just weren't that well built to begin with. Now, if you don't want to sacrifice the image in even the tiniest of ways, a lot of supported Sony games will let you play with Fidelity Pro options to get the most out of the advanced ray tracing. So a game like Ratchet & Clank will let you dial up the reflections or ambient occlusions so that you can see how that changes both the image and performance. And if I'm being honest, I think it sometimes can be a little tough to see the differences here compared to the PS Pro unless you're jumping into photo mode and hunting for it. Now don't get me wrong, the lighting has improved. Shadows are more clearly defined in Fidelity Pro, for instance, and you can see more detail in them. Now, as Jacob will tell you, that's one of the benefits of features like ray tracing.
Yeah, so it's just important to think about how light works in the real world, with light bouncing around a room, bouncing off of walls, bouncing off your skin. Things are illuminated by all sorts of different sources, and so having more ray tracing power on the PS5 Pro essentially allows the game to show that. It allows it to show all this blooming, all of this kind of residual light that's bouncing around the room.
But all of that said, when I was testing to see the exact differences that features like ray tracing bring to the table, sometimes it felt like I was playing a game of spot the difference. I was looking really closely at images back and forth to see the minutia of grass way off in the distance. And here's where I want to get back to that question I posed at the very top. The PS5 Pro is more powerful than the PS5, but will you notice a difference? Let me pose this question to you. How many times while playing Spider-Man 2 did you stand underneath a tree and slowly pan the camera up and down to catch the exact moment that the shadow stopped swaying and turned static? I hope the answer is 0. This is the hard part of reviewing and recommending something like the PS5 Pro. I could sit here all day and show you side-by-side clips where we zoom in really close on a distant detail and say, look, it's technically smoother. But at some point, I'd kind of be playing into the marketing. It's really impressive when you hear that a GPU is 28% faster. When you squint your eyes enough at 2 pictures and find that little difference, you'll buy into the idea that this is a big upgrade. I mean, go back and watch the PS5 Pro reveal video where Mark Cerny zooms in 100 times on some characters in some distant bleachers in Ratchet & Clank. The goal is getting you to buy that these very isolated, out-of-context moments prove that the tech is better. There are probably some of you out there who have watched to this point and feel like it's all noise. Maybe you feel like we're splitting hairs to show you a slightly smoother shadow. I'll be really honest, a lot of players out there just won't notice some of these finer details. And I don't think those people should buy a PS5 Pro, especially with no disk drive or stand. If I'm buying a premium console, I want it to feel premium. I mean, come on, we couldn't have gotten a DualSense Edge thrown in. If you're feeling like this is a ripoff, that is a very valid feeling. On the other hand, I know that a lot of you watching out there are really serious about your tech too. Maybe playing games at 30 frames per second makes you a little nauseous. Maybe you really want to feel like you're part of the game and seeing blurry textures just takes you out of it. For those people, all these little ticky-tacky details I've described here aren't just isolated cases. If the characters in the way back of Ratchet & Clank scenes are clearer, that speaks to the image stability and fidelity of the entire game. I'm hyper-focused on the details here because it's the best way to deep dive into something like this. But the PS5 Pro will ultimately make an entire game feel smoother. And yes, you might not be entirely conscious of that all the time. I'm honestly in the same boat as you. My eyes get used to it. But if you're very sensitive to technical friction, this probably is good enough to justify that price. So there's no one-size-fits-all recommendation I can give here because you have to trust your gut. If you don't notice any problems with your current PS5, save your money. Get yourself a nice dinner. Go buy a chicken farm in Nebraska. Do anything else with that money. But if performance and fidelity are really important to you and you don't just want to be a PC gamer, PSSR is a major improvement that's probably enough to justify the purchase on its own. The new GPU, the ray tracing, none of that hurts. It makes a difference. But it's that 4K 60 frames per second experience that will give you the consistency that you've been begging for this console generation. It's 4 years too late, and it'll probably get replaced by the PS6 in another 4, but an upgrade's an upgrade. If you're the kind of person who was already sold on this the day it was revealed, I don't think you'll be disappointed. That is, as long as developers show up to optimize their games.